So what am I going to talk about today? So just for the next 15, 20 minutes or so, just to share some points from our perspective in regards to an overview of the transportation market as we see it, some of the key market drivers, both from our lens and also from that of our customers, customer ESG strategy and why that's becoming a more discussed topic, certainly in people that we're talking to day in, day out now, and I've got some points on that I want to share with you. I'm going to talk about EVs because whenever you've been to an automotive conference when they don't, hopefully I'll share something new with you. But I just wanted to touch on it and not ignore it because it's something that's gathering momentum, as we all know. And then just share with you some of the transportation challenges as, again, our customers have shared with us right here, right now. So the industry's huge, as we all know, and accounts for just over 2.5 million people in the UK in transportation generally, if you take the government statistics. So it's huge. I think there was a mention earlier to some of the challenges around recruitment, and our sector is not, kind of aside from that. At any one time, there's 45,000 vacancies in this sector, and there was at the midpoint of 2024, and that's concerning. And I've got some stats a bit later around that about what our customers are telling us on this front. The workforce remains predominantly male. No surprises there. And faces a slightly Asian demographic, but I think we spoke earlier about trying to bring people into our industry, and it's tough. It's tough for tyre fitters, it's tough for tyre manufacturers, it's tough for industry generally to try and attract young talent into our business, and yet they're the next wave of the success of this sector. So I think there's got to be more to be done, incentive or otherwise, to try and get people into more apprenticeships in the automotive sector because they just don't seem to want to leave school or college or university and move into the tyre world. So we've got to keep an eye on that as we navigate. Clearly, as I mentioned there, the sector is significant in value, just over 47 billion, and split by some of the segmentation. And then I wanted just to leave just a bit of a sombering thought in terms of just some of the challenges I know that some parts of that sector have. One of the stats there, and I couldn't make this more relevant, unfortunately, in terms of date range, but we saw just over 460 businesses go bankrupt in 2023 as a result of primarily the pressures upon cost to serve, around taxation, around interest rates were a number just of those key drivers. And I'm sure as we're looking through 24 and into 25, sadly, I suspect that number's going to swell, which is really disappointing. But we know certainly these key pressures upon operators to keep the business going. So some of the key drivers and emissions. So what we're seeing is the EV vehicle impact is having an effect on some tyre requirements in some parts. Certainly we work with a number of the major leasing and fleet management companies. They've seen a huge tranche of EVs coming into service. And of course that slows down demand on tyres because they arrive on new tyres from the start point. We're not seeing all those trends around EV tyres being worn quicker than your traditional ICE vehicle. There are some exceptions to it, but in the main it's still down to the person behind the wheel. That's what the data is telling us. Tyre wear emissions, there's still key focus on that aspect and the environmental concerns, and this is something that we're finding today when we're talking to customers and prospects. They've got a key drive in terms of understanding more about that subject, and yet I find some of the most simplistic kind of discussions around how a tyre wears and where that rubber goes, people just still don't associate with the environment. I don't know why, but they don't, and it's not until you educate them and inform them they actually understand what the impact of that would look at. And then you can read the piece on the Euro 7. 2 points from this slide I think worthy of mention is something that was mentioned earlier in regards to ESG. So some of the stats, in fact nearly all of the stats I quote through this presentation over the next 3 or 4 slides were published by Ernst & Young in a survey and a report they published this year, which you can Google and find the detail to. But they found out some quite interesting things, which was 78% of professionals believe that business professionals were stated that the ESG issues were considered important within their organisation. That's a huge shift. You know, at one time, many years ago, ESG was kind of one of those tick boxes. Yeah, we've got a slide on our web or page on our website. We do the usual stuff to get where we need to be accredited to through ISO and otherwise. But actually now we're seeing a real trend towards people taking this stuff seriously. And then lastly on this slide, actually it's now influencing their decision on procurement. So 64% of organizations said that their procurement professionals within their business actually use the ESG standards when appointing a supplier. So you would have seen, or maybe picked up on my first slide, the whole B Corp is a big wave in sector generally, not just automotive. And hopefully, we were hoping to be B Corp accredited for this meeting, but we're still in the final days of waiting for that. And we'll be the first kind of tyre fleet management company in the UK to have that accreditation, which is great. And that really stands strong in terms of what we mean. So some interesting stats there. So ESG, what are the priorities and what do our customers tell us? Well, I guess there's a few things. I'll just whiz them on. So there's 5 key points they're talking to us about continually, which is decarbonation of fleet operations. And this is about reducing emissions, reducing fuel consumption, improving driver behaviour generally, controlling costs is what they're telling us. And this is all linked to how they're trying to strive to emit less emissions generally. Insight's a really interesting point. There's certainly something that's not new necessarily, but modern technology, AI, bots and other applications that we use day in, day out now are featuring in our sector. So they want to know tomorrow's newspaper. It's almost a case of, I've got today's news, that's great, that tells me what happened yesterday, but I want tomorrow's newspaper that's going to tell me what's going to happen tomorrow. And there's the value in the proposition. So they want us to use, they're challenging us to use the data in a better way to be able to get through those lines and lines and lines and lines of lots of data and get them to the point they just want to be able to make a decision on quickly. So insights around data is something that we're being pushed upon and we're investing to heavily. Husbandry practices go without mention. We all know the kind of concept of that. And certainly there's more pressure upon ensuring that the compliance around those requirements are strong and are there. And ultimately, you know, I mentioned the driver behaviour piece. You know, we still see examples where we'll put 2 vehicles into service on the same day. Both will cover the same distance, but one would have spent £5,000 in general SMR and the other one would have spent £500. It's just the individual behind the wheel that's influencing those costs. So they want us to be better and more informed using the data we have so they can drive better policy, compliance and almost accountability at driver level so that they understand the impact they're having on that vehicle and the operational cost of running that business. And you know, I mentioned the word there, gamification. We've got a number of customers now that are talking to us about actually, you know, providing a bit of competition amongst their depots, their branches, their cost centres, whatever the structure might look like, to try and drive some, you know, I want to be at the top, I don't want to be at the bottom. And so we're helping them using the data we collect to be able to do that, which is quite exciting and certainly new space for them. So EVs, so what's the latest? So just I thought I'd make sure that everyone's still in the room with me. I guess my question here is, okay, how many people arrived in an EV to this event today? Just a show of hands would be perfect. Okay, so I'd guess probably 20, 30%, maybe something like that, at a guess, something not too distant. Okay, of those EV drivers, I'm interested, who would recommend an EV to family or to friends? Again, just a quick show of hands for those that showed, if you could, that'd be great. Cool, so probably a lesser amount. So this is really interesting, and just one final question, and I'll stop you asking to put your hand up. Who drove a diesel vehicle here today? Okay, we'll get you all on the way out, that's fine, for those that are interested in the environment. Okay, so again, Ernst & Young did a study, and the insight that came back was really interesting. So the suggestion was that 70% of all UK respondents plan to buy an EV within the next 5 years. So that's quite important. And I've listed some of the reasons here as to what they cited around why they're making those decisions. And there's nothing too surprising there, other for me, I guess, than that the whole thing about EV range and anxiety still plays a part to their consideration. But actually, the infrastructure truly is there, and those that drive an EV know it is actually there. It's just you're not always looking for it. But if you do look for it, you'll find actually just a quick map on, just a quick map today from this location would probably have thousands of EV chargers that readily available. And there is that still thing, as I mentioned, through this around range. But certainly modern cars are 300 miles plus in a real world environment, so they're working. And as battery technology moves, that could move to 500, and certainly you're seeing adverts now through some of the manufacturers where they're publicising these sort of numbers. And then finally, what's interesting here is I think the average journey in the UK in a car is still under 25 miles. So actually, if you think about it, that 400, 500, 600 mile range, the reality in most occasions of you using that is probably few and far between. So it can work for you. So how are we doing? Well, you'll see in the top graph there from 2020 through to a forecast at the end of 2025, our EV adoption is growing. There are some drivers behind that for certain, and I've cited some of them. So whilst we're still behind Europe, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, almost 60% of all new vehicle registrations in the UK are B2B. So it dominates the market. For those that have a company car, then they know that the advantages on a BIK are there for EV adoption. So that's what's driving that agenda more so. Consumer is still very, very low and equates to a very, very small number. And unless I think there's further additional incentives through government planning, which we've seen recently on some of the major discounting structures, then I think it's going to remain relatively stagnant. I don't foresee a huge surge of Mr. and Mrs. Smith moving into EVs, but it could take time. But other countries are doing it. And Norway leads the way, and we'll talk about them in a moment. So in the B2B environment, 75% of all registrations are EV, and that's what's driving that curve in terms of the number of registrations. As we look across Europe, and I include the UK and Europe because geographically we are, I know there's other discussions to be had, Norway leads the way. It's a much smaller market, so it looks strange against the numbers you have there. But it's primarily consumer because they have a very small percentage of company cars. And it's mainly driven through government incentives on, there's VAT exemption, zero registration taxes, free tolls, reduced ferry costs, and so on and so on and so on. And in fact, Norway will probably, I suspect, looking at the recent figures, will be 100% EV by 2030 latest. So they'll have done away with internal combustion engines completely. So quite an interesting stat. Okay, so what do our customers tell us about the challenges? Just moving on and away from EV just for a moment. So it's, to be honest, the most recent and most prominent feedback we get is about driver availability. It's a huge concern, almost pre-pandemic and pandemic levels, and arguably getting worse as we see it. So they're averaging, there's a shortage of a circa 40,000 drivers across the UK at any one point in time. And 40,000 per annum are needed just to sustain the demand. And they anticipate if we don't do something about that, could be almost 200,000 by 2030. So our customers are telling us that it's a real issue for them, and they've got to get smarter because you can't create people to drive vehicles to deliver their goods and services. They can do things around remuneration, around incentives, and otherwise, but they're working under really, really thin margins. So it's a challenge for them. They can't just keep matching and paying costs associated with trying to attract the very best or what's available in the market because it's just not sustainable as a business. So this is something they're really quite aware of. They're also talking about the recent stat that was issued again by Ernst & Young around the number of driver qualification cards that have lapsed in the last 12 months. So just short of 120,000 of these cards have lapsed, which are unseen since the pandemic. So people are choosing to leave the industry, either through retirement, a change of role, a change of sector, a change of job, whatever it might be. But they're not renewing these cards, and we all know it's a key reason why, and a piece that they have to have in order to drive that vehicle. So it points that people are not just coming into the sector, a bit like I started this presentation with, but also those that are in it are choosing actually not to renew and stay. So it's going to be a compound issue if we're not too careful. What are they doing about it? Well, there's some suggestion that they're trying to kind of shorten the process for someone to renew that card. Historically, it was quite an extensive process to do so, but there's legislation and suggestion now that they can shorten that down to a 7-hour course and this will enable people to regain that qualification card and allow them to get back into work or rejoin the sector. So these are considerations that are being rolled out, but they're still bedding in, and it's going to take time as anything to change and move those things around at the speed you want to. So what are people asking us for? Well, they're asking us to reduce avoidable roadside events, so cut VOR issue at source. And this goes back to what I said earlier in terms of just good husbandry, good proactive service on the ground before vehicles actually leave depot or site, regular inspections, as well as driver coaching and toolbox talks. They just want to try and get their arms around the tyre, because if they've got one driver and that driver is really critical to the service delivery of their products and service, and there's a tyre issue at roadside en route, that stops their day. So anything they can do to improve the unlikelihood of that, then certainly they're absolutely keen to do so. They're demanding on us to build better network resilience, and that means we rely on our partners to service in the best way they can possibly do so, and also just provide resilience around peak times and certain routes where traditionally they know there could be a problem. It's a bit like when you see an ambulance parked on the bridge of the M40 at a certain time of a certain day. It's not just coincidence they're there, it's because they know there's a probability there will be an incident at that time on that stretch of motorway because the data tells them. And it's a bit like with us, how can we be more predictable around trying to see when there will be a tyre failure? And really just scheduling and using data to lead our triage. So just being a bit smarter, as I mentioned, with the information that we've got, such that we can be more predictive and more preventative and try and reduce vehicle availability. That's ultimately what I know that everyone strives for. So I've got 2 minutes 30 seconds, so thankfully, even with my wisdom teeth removed, I'm still here, so which is great. So thank you for your time. I hope you found some use for that. I'm around all day and this evening, so I'm happy to chat, and I know we've got a Q&A session a bit later on, so thank you.